Welcome to an all-new episode of Canzano and Wilner, the podcast. We're fresh off the college football playoff national championship. I'm John Canzano. You can read me at johncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. Find him at wilnerhotline.com. Jon Wilner, you got a new scene going on behind you. You're in a new room every time. How big is this house of yours? You got a new room every time I see you.
It's actually quite small. Usually I record. I got to set up in our garage. Except there's no heat in the garage, and it's been very chilly at night. I'm chilly, right? I recognize much of the country is, sub-freezing, and it's snowing on the Florida beaches, but it's chilly. So I moved I'm in my son's room. He didn't know I was doing this, so I didn't ask him to clean it up, and I hope it's not too gruesome a background. But it's warmer. I won't be shivering.
Story. How cold? What are we talking about in the Bay Area?
I'm embarrassed to say. It's like,
but it's all relative, right?
Yeah, it is. Last night it was like 36, 37, which is not that cold, except you go out there in the morning in the garage and it, that's pretty chilly. And I certainly know it was not nearly as cold as it was in Atlanta, huh?
Oh man. Yeah.
Welcome home, weary traveler.
Yeah. The United States Army Corps of Engineers did a study where they were trying to figure out if soldiers who were going to have to go to cold weather places to be in combat situations or recon situations, they were trying to figure out, could they train the soldiers to acclimate to cold? Like, if you trained in cold, would you be better in cold conditions? And so they did all these studies trying to get soldiers, and they found out it doesn't make a difference. You train in the cold weather, you train in the warm weather. It doesn't make you any more suited to be in the cold weather. Just some people tend to deal with it better than others. And I suspect you don't deal well with the cold. And I was in the Midwest covering college basketball in the late 90s. You drive by the bank and would have the sign flashing and it would be like 5 degrees.
Yeah.
No, I didn't do well in that cold weather. And Atlanta reminded me of that. And it got down, it was in the teens. Game day morning, I think it was like 17 degrees, 16 degrees. The next morning it was like 14 degrees. But it was the wind chill. The wind was howling, and the wind, and granted, I'm going from the media hotel to the shuttle to the arena or to the stadium.
Yeah.
Stadium. It's not like you're out there holding a jackhammer. Let's say that, but it was cold, Wilner. And in the airport situation, like I can't.
Well, I saw some stuff on Twitter, and I mean, this is not. I don't like when sports media gets into a woe is us, but this was an issue that affected fans too, right?
Yeah, I mean, so many Notre Dame and Ohio State fans came to the game. It was the second most attended CFP title game, second only to that first game that held in 2015 between Oregon and Ohio State. So you had like 70,000 fans in the stadium, and you had a lot of fans who came to Atlanta just to travel and see if they could get a ticket and didn't get into the game. They were just hanging out in Atlanta. So all of these people are trying to get on flights the day after the game. It was like the Atlanta airport didn't see it coming. Like they hadn't thought, there's a big event going on. They had the infrastructure wasn't there. The TSA lines, they had nobody there to direct like TSA pre versus, clear versus regular TSA line. They were kind of funneling, at least in the early part of the morning when I was there, funneling everyone into the same line, and then having the line split off when you got to the TSA area. It was weaving through baggage claim. I saw Teresa Gold, the Pac-12 commissioner, right before, I was in line for about 90 minutes before I got through security. And even the security staff, the TSA staff running the machines, it was really cumbersome and slow. I usually get to the airport an hour before my flight. On this one, I got there about an hour 40 before my flight. And Wilner, I had to run for it. I was running through the airport. The train broke down and in the Atlanta airport, so it wasn't running. So I had to run from TSA past Terminal A into Terminal B. I arrive at my gate. The door's still open. Like, my flight was leaving at 9:05. I was there at 9:05.
Oh, man.
And the door was still open. I was like, thank goodness. I was glistening when I got onto the plane. And there were some people who didn't make it. There were some empty seats on my flight. So, they left without him. But I had a pilot tell me, and if you're ever in this situation, I had a pilot. As I was running through the airport, I got on an escalator to get up to the B terminal, and there was a pilot next to me. And I said, are they going to leave me? And he said that the flight crew is always aware of what's going on at TSA. So if you're in that
Okay.
situation, he said they'll pause. They're not going to hold the flight for 2 people. But if there's like 20 people who are on the plane, he says they'll delay a little bit to try to allow people time to get there. But in the Atlanta airport, leave lots of time. I have also heard people say you can go over to the international terminal, go through there in only minutes, and then take about a 25-minute walk back to the other terminals. So there's some hacks there, but Atlanta wasn't ready. And it made me think about all the cities, like what a great event. And yet people are going to leave going, gosh, Atlanta sucks because of that airport experience.
Oh man. Well, that kind of speaks to a broader theme of the CFP, which was the success of the North, right? I mean, here you had 2 Northern schools playing for the title in Atlanta. Just, a starkly different finish than we've had for most of the previous 10 years where it's been SEC schools, right? Sometimes it's SEC versus SEC in Atlanta. Nobody's flying. Right. So that was very interesting how the dynamics had shifted. There's been a lot made of the Big Ten winning back-to-back national titles now, the SEC not appearing in back-to-back national titles. Does this, what accounts for that? Is it the portal? Is it NIL combination? What do you think? What was the vibe there about the power shift at the top of the sport?
It was weird because, Notre Dame, although they're playing in the ACC schedule-wise, there's this feel about Notre Dame that, they don't really belong anywhere, right? They're this strange entity that is kind of out there and they're their own thing. They have their own ecosystem, so to speak. And then it's Ohio State. Nobody's surprised that Ohio State was in this game. And so it was really interesting to watch, that happen. And then, you're right. There was something, I've covered like 10 or 12 of these BCS to CFP title games. There was something missing. There was no LSU. There was no Alabama. There was no Georgia. And maybe the SEC is getting a taste of what the Pacific time zone has felt for a long time. Like the title game, except for Oregon in 2015 and Washington, last year, the title game has not featured teams from the Pacific time zone. It's felt like the season ended for a whole swath of the country. So maybe the SEC is getting a taste of that. I don't know. But, I think it leads to a larger question, how successful was this event in your eyes?
I think it was a huge success. There's certainly plenty of issues you can quibble with, from the selection process to seeding, but the bottom line is they did this to increase access for parts of the country that didn't care, like you just mentioned, access for conferences, teams. So in that regard, I thought it was a huge success, and it certainly made the regular season more meaningful for dozens of schools playing dozens of games across the second half of the season. I mean, look, there's no right. If it's a 4-team playoff this year, certainly there's no ASU, there's no Boise, but there's not a Ohio State or Notre Dame. Right. They wouldn't have gotten in. So I think it did exactly what it was designed to do.
Well, look, I think, for me, I'll look at it 2 different ways. Like, yes, what's the purpose of a playoff? It's to give you an undisputed champion and it's merit-based, right? And I think we got that for the first time, I'm not going to say in a long time, but we got that for, there were many years where we felt like, were we getting the 2 best teams? Certainly before the playoff and the 4-team playoff, we thought that with the BCS for a while. So it answered that question. It gave us a champion that can sit there at the end of the season, like the NCAA tournament, like the Super Bowl. Nobody's going to quibble that Ohio State was deserving of winning the championship. I also think it was interesting to watch the ticket prices. And, I walked around Mercedes-Benz Stadium and I just people watched. And I stood and who's here in the stadium? And, it's evident that, this is the CFP is trying to become a mini Super Bowl with this championship game. They're holding it in a Super Bowl like setting at an NFL stadium.
Yep.
Ticket prices are being driven like their Super Bowl prices. The scene around the event is blossomed in a way with all these VIP parties and concerts and things that are going on in a way that feels more Super Bowl week like.
Right.
They're not quite there. Like, I did talk with several sponsors who said that, look, in a lot of years, the NFL will charge sponsors to be part of these events. The CFP was inviting sponsors in, kind of saying, we want you here. We're not charging yet, but you better believe that as they grow this event and they get proof of performance, they're going to go back and be like, hey, you want to be part of these things? You're going to have to pay for it. So I can feel them wanting to turn this into this mega event that is Super Bowl light. And the ticket prices, Wilner, like, I talked to a Notre Dame fan who had paid $1,500 for his ticket a few days before the game. He was really nervous that he'd overpaid. He thought ticket prices were going to come down. And then I saw him in the hotel lobby the next day, and he goes, you know what? Prices went up $1,000 since yesterday.
Oh.
By the time kickoff hit, the get-in price was $3,600 in the upper level. These were affluent people who bought their tickets, traveled to the game. It's not cheap. The hotels around there were $700, $800, $900 a night leading up to the game. It was not a cheap event, but second largest crowd. I could feel the CFP though, Wilner, when they made that announcement of the crowd, the PA announcer saying second largest crowd to ever witness a college football CFP national championship game. They're really pushing that this was popular,
right?
That this was well received, and that there's a lot of money involved.
Well, certainly well received, a lot of money, and two schools playing for the title. Notre Dame hadn't won a title in how many decades? It's like 1988, I think it's been. Something like late 80s. And Ohio State's been 10 years. So, but that's two of the schools that have the biggest fan bases, the broadest appeal. I mean, they couldn't have picked, in a lot of ways, a better matchup if they wanted to drive up the ticket prices. But I do wonder, right? You mentioned the NFL. There's only one. If you're a fan of the Chiefs or anybody really in the NFL, you only have to go to one neutral site game, the Super Bowl, right? The way the CFP is structured, if you're an Ohio State fan, right, you got to go neutral site games, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. That is a pretty big ask for fans. And I wonder longer term, is that financially going to work, or do they need to think about trying to get more of the rounds onto campus sites? So you're putting less burden on the fans to travel, especially northern fans traveling to Sunbelt sites, because that's where most of the big bowls are.
Yeah, and I talked to fans who said that. There were some Ohio State fans who said, hey, I was kind of glad they didn't go to the Big Ten championship game now looking back. Because had they gone to Indianapolis and played in that game, I wouldn't have gone to the Cotton Bowl, or I wouldn't have gone to the Rose Bowl. And I said, did you go to every round? And they said, no, we had to pick. My brother went to the Cotton Bowl. I went to the Rose Bowl. Now I'm at the title game. And gosh, I wouldn't be here had they been here, last year and won the thing. And, so I wonder too, if there'll be some exhaustion just as maybe some of the same teams show up year after year in these games. I certainly have seen that in covering Oregon State, Washington State, that the fans get real excited for a Rose Bowl. But then when you make, the playoff, now they go, well, I'm going to go to the conference championship game, but I'm not going to go to the Rose Bowl. And,
right.
So you have to start making choices as a consumer. I also think, you're hitting around it. Like, one of the big changes that needs to be made is that, the high seeds in this tournament didn't really win anything. They got 24 days off and then looked flat when the game kicked off. And even Arizona State started slow in their game. All those teams that got the buys looked flat. So what did they really win? I think, like the NFL, when you are a high seed, you win a home game. You should play a home game. And, maybe the semifinals and the championship game are always, these big bowl games. But I think they really have to look at that, because you're right. There's so much pressure on the fans to spend $3,000 to $5,000 to go to this game.
I mean, what an Oregon fan, right? Some went to Indianapolis for the Big Ten. Then it's Pasadena. If Oregon had won the Rose Bowl, how many fans would have committed to then going? Where did Ohio State go? I guess the Cotton
Stadium, Cotton Bowl.
You go to the Cotton Bowl, and then you're going to turn around and go back to Atlanta. That's 3 trips across the country for postseason games. That is a huge ask.
Yeah, and I was told that the ticket prices at the Cotton Bowl were soft.
Yeah,
I feel like that was the round that got hurt the most, because that semifinal round, people had already gone, let's go to Pasadena for New Year's Day.
Right.
And if they're going to the championship game, I'll hold out because I'm not going to the Cotton Bowl.
Here's the issue. College sports, college football, so rooted in tradition, if they're going to move more of these rounds onto campuses, they can't have the Big Six bowls hosting as much as they do. Maybe you play the quarterfinals on campus and you create a rotation with the neutral site for the six, and then you got a neutral site for the championship game. But it's going to be hard. Are they going to say to the Rose Bowl, sorry? Are they going to say to the Sugar Bowl, sorry, we're going to move every round on campus except for the national championship game? It's tough.
Yeah.
But they got to do something.
I would keep the semifinals on the road. But I would say, let's go opening round, quarterfinals. Those are home games.
Yeah.
And then what I would do is I would take the last two out. Okay. You're playing in whatever rotation didn't make the semifinals. You're playing in a Rose Bowl, or you're playing in a Peach Bowl, or you're playing in an Orange Bowl. So you give them kind of a consolation prize with teams that are good. And, again, we're going to have opt-outs and we'll have a whole other problem to solve, but that's another episode. But
yes,
I want to see home games. I want to see home games for the high seeds. There's a reason why, the Eagles get to host playoff games in the NFC. They earned it during the regular season. Let's see that happen in college football.
It's going to be tough. And the calendar is a big issue too, right? And when the NFL goes to an 18th game, which is inevitable in a few years, I think, that game's probably going to get played in January. So it's going to create one more weekend in January where the NFL just dominates.
Yeah.
And I think that there wasn't a whole lot of buzz I know there was a huge crowd there, but there wasn't that much buzz over the weekend for the championship game because it's all about the NFL.
Yeah.
So they gotta look at that too.
Yeah. Even in the media center at, the media hotel on Saturday and Sunday, they had this huge TV that was set up, massive TV, every sports fan's dream. It looked like a sports book inside the media hospitality area. The NFL games were on. And I thought to myself, this is not what the CFP wants. Like, you're in the shadow of this, and so that, maybe you move the season up, like everybody move it up a week, move it up 2 weeks, get these games played and get everything settled earlier.
Yeah.
It can help you with your calendar and the portal as well. Helps you with bowl season.
Yep.
I mean, I would be really surprised if college football is not seriously thinking about moving at least a week earlier.
I think they are. If you move the season up a week and you got rid of conference championship games, you could have the national championship at the Rose Bowl every year on January 1st.
Yeah, I keep banging the drum for that, and I'm told there's too much money involved. They won't ever do that, but we'll see. Brings up another question. The window of opportunity gets talked about a lot with these teams. Ohio State had a window of opportunity. They seized it. When I say window of opportunity, who do you think about?
I think about Oregon. This was it. It seemed like everything was pointed to this year. And, they got wiped out in the quarterfinals. The roster, everything, the way they built the program for this era, the transition in the Big Ten, trying to win it for Phil Knight, all pointed to this year. This was the year. And now, I wonder, when, if ever, will it be the year for Oregon?
Yeah. And look, I agree. Dylan Gabriel, the way they brought him in, they had to pay him $2 million probably to get him to come and do what he did at Oregon. It was lined up for them.
Yeah.
It was in this era, like Oregon is one of the few schools that I think really benefits from NIL being a Wild West, and the conference realignment played to their favor. And but I think what happened to Oregon is, it was in some ways they're a victim of the circumstance of this new playoff being new.
Yep.
If they're not, I think eventually 2 years from now, when they make changes to seeding and all that, the top seed's not going to sit for 24 days. That was a big layoff. And it wasn't like, the national, Chip Kelly brought this up, the national title game in 2011, he had 37 days off after playing in the Civil War before they played Auburn. But Auburn also had 30 plus days off.
That's right.
And so this time, Oregon was playing an Ohio State team that got a primer game 10 days before.
Yes.
And, they were ready to go. I also think if the seeding had just been normal seeding without conference champions getting the top 4 seeds, Oregon plays Indiana in the Rose Bowl, not Ohio State. even if they're sitting, Wilner, I have to think, you get Indiana in a Rose Bowl situation. That's a different game.
Yeah.
Like, they win that game, but whatever.
I just wonder though, not only for Oregon, but for Washington and USC as well. Ohio State is sitting there. They're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
They're an absolute machine. Notre Dame now. So it's partly about getting through the Big Ten, but it's also, you play in the semifinals, quarterfinals. You got to win those games. Notre Dame is on the upswing with Marcus Freeman, right? Penn State clearly has got something going. Michigan was down.
Yeah.
They're not going to be down. I wonder, right? If I gave you, say, an over-under for will any of the West Coast schools that join the Big Ten get to the national championship game in the next 3 or 4 years? You think they will? Any of them?
I think it depends what Oregon does. And Oregon's always thinking a step, they're trying to look around the corner and see what's next. And so all these ADs are writing these letters, for example, Jen Cohen is the latest at USC to write this letter saying, hey, we're going to be on the hook for $20.5 million in revenue sharing.
Right.
Oregon put that letter out in November, right? I mean, they're always just trying to get ahead, stay ahead. So I won't put it past them to find an angle. I also think, there are just so many holes that you have to fill. I looked at Ohio State, Wilner, and I think it's going to be difficult for Ohio State to get back to the title game next year. But you're right. Like, they're definitely going to be picked as a playoff team. And I think Oregon will be picked as a playoff team. But what did we learn? We learned that, through all this playoff and all that we talked about, all the access that teams were going to have, we end up with Ohio State at the end. And I think, we all kind of look at that and go, well, it still proves like you can lose a couple of games during your regular season and you could still come back if you're Ohio State and win it all. But window of opportunity, I definitely am wondering about the schools that moved from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. Would they have, are we going to look back in a decade and say they would have been better off with access to the playoff in general? Is USC going to make it? Is Washington going to make it with any frequency? Is UCLA ever going to get to the playoff? Mick Cronin belly aching about the travel for basketball, but I'm just thinking about it from a football perspective. Like Oregon might be the only school that moved that, went to the Big Ten that gets to the playoff with any kind of frequency. And, is that really better off? But
well, Oregon certainly is built. The machinery of Oregon football is, I think, more directed and more committed to doing what it takes to win in this era. I'm not sure that Washington has that machinery. I think USC does. I just don't know if USC has the right coach to do it. Oregon's got the coach and the machinery.
Yeah.
USC's got the machinery, not the coach. Washington might have the coach, but I don't know about the machinery, right? You need both.
Yeah. And look, Oregon's got some holes on defense. They're losing their top 5 or 6 defensive backs.
Yeah.
They didn't go out in the portal yet and get a quarterback. They must really like Dante Moore, but we haven't seen Dante Moore do it. Like, I kind of need to see him play some games before I'll believe it. But coaches are acting like they've got their guy, so they must. I'll trust that Dan Lanning has seen something in practice that tells him he's got a QB, and they'll have some holes to fill in the defensive line and offensive line. But I'll tell you, I was down on the field before the game. I was watching Ohio State warm up. I was watching Notre Dame warm up, and I had a thought like Oregon's got guys. But Oregon just has some of those guys. Like they didn't have depth and the sheer size and the physicality on the defensive line that Ohio State and Notre Dame had. They didn't have like lines of those guys. They had a Jordan Birch, but these other programs have recruited depth on that defensive line. And I think that was a big factor in the game. I was watching Ohio State's defensive line, Notre Dame's defensive line.
Yep.
They were built different. And
they were.
And Penn State's got that, right? You're right.
Oh, yeah.
Penn State would be like kind of a sweetheart pick right now if you're picking a national champion next year. But
for sure,
like Penn State, Notre Dame getting to the title game, something like that. But I'd love to see some variety. What did you make of kind of the variety of teams that we saw and the window of opportunity that way, like Boise State getting in, SMU getting in?
Well, I think a lot of the window of opportunity depends on what happens next, right? Because the current format is going to hold through next season, and I think we should talk about this in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Then it could change starting with the 2026 season. There might not be as much opportunity for those kind of teams. They certainly, Boise comported themselves pretty well, and certainly ASU did, but the ACC, their teams getting drubbed, that didn't help the cause for continuing the access that those conferences currently have, everybody other than the SEC and Big Ten, right? Because Clemson got beat pretty bad and SMU got run off the field by Penn State. So I just don't know that there's going to be the access on a longer term basis that we had this year. So ASU gave us one of the best playoff games we've ever had. Boise State certainly held its own. But I do worry longer term what the SEC and Big Ten might do to this thing.
Yeah, we can get to that in a bit, and I think you're right, though. But I just keep thinking window of opportunity. The sands are shifting beneath the feet of these schools because now revenue sharing's coming in, and they're just grasping NIL and how to deal with NIL, and now here comes this whole other element. And you got a kid at Wisconsin saying, can I get in the portal? They go, no, you're under a contract with us. And he says, well, I'm going to just enroll at a new school anyway. And the NCAA goes, that's okay. Yeah, we can't really stop anybody from doing that.
Right.
I am. The target is moving. The sands are shifting. And so when I talk about window of opportunity, I think you're going to see some schools that kind of go for it because they're thinking about what comes way down the line. It's not even about winning a national championship. It's about being in this conversation. Are you a playoff team? Washington State got in the conversation. You're watching Oregon State right now. They're spending like I did not expect them to spend. They spent $2 million on 3 players, a quarterback and 2 tight ends. I think you're seeing some schools that watched SMU and Arizona State and Boise State get a lot of love and a lot of momentum from being in the playoff, because I think we're going to, much like a Final Four, I think teams are going to hold up, like they're going to put it on the side of their stadium. Hey, we've been to 5 CFP playoffs.
Right, sure.
We've been, like the Final Four. So I think you're going to see, like when we talk about window of opportunity, we talk about window of opportunity to win it, but also there's a window of opportunity right now for schools that go for it and do it right to get to the playoff because they want to be, they want to be included in what comes next. If is it 48 teams? Is it 60 teams? We talked about that, but
and certainly they want to be what ASU. They want ASU's magic, right?
Yeah.
There you go. Yep. Who's ASU next year? It's a good question, right? It's hard to know with the portal, right? We know what everybody thought about ASU before the season, and look where they ended up, right? Picked last in the Big 12, ended up winning the thing.
Yeah.
You could do that in the Big 12 because there's no Ohio State and there's no Georgia standing there.
Yeah.
The Big 12 is wide open every year, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, I think. So the question is, the next ASU a Big 12 team, or could there be, an SMU in the ACC or an Indiana in the Big 10?
I think it's an ACC school if we're trying to draw a parallel to what we saw in the Big 12.
All right.
Because I think it has that same wide open feel. But I'm going to go with a guy that I've watched, Mario Cristobal. I think Miami, I don't think it set well with Cristobal that they didn't get to the playoff after everything where they were midseason. He goes out, they're spending like crazy. That Carson Beck is there. I watched Cristobal. I think he's got his flaws as a head coach, but I think one thing is that guy is determined and motivated. And I get that they're not like they're, an outlier, like picked last in their conference, but Miami is kind of an interesting pick to me to be a little bit disruptive in this next playoff. They didn't get to participate this time. I'll keep an eye on that. And then if I want to pick a Big 12 school, I would either pick BYU or Utah.
There you go.
I just think Kyle Whittingham and Utah, like they had to feel really bad about how their season went and, the Cam Rising thing and all that. They will be back. Utah will be back. And BYU looked like it had all the ingredients to be a team that could punch above its weight and get to the playoff. and then they just kind of didn't make it. And maybe they play with a chip on their shoulder. What about you?
Well, BYU was almost ASU. If the tiebreaker had fallen differently, they could have been in the title game. I thought they were underrated by the committee the whole time. They've got their quarterback coming back, a lot of key players. That's a great call. I think Utah's a great call too, with the changes they're making on offense. I like Illinois as a sleeper. I think Brett Bielema has got something going on. They won 10 games. They got completely lost in the shuffle because everybody's talking about Indiana and Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, blah, blah, blah. They won. Illinois was 10-3. And their quarterback's coming back. So they're like a sleeper pick, I think. If a 10-3 team can be a sleeper pick the next year, I think they may be the team that kind of sneaks in as, the third or fourth Big Ten team that gets an at-large berth and gets in there. But everybody wants to be ASU. Who would have figured that, right? Everybody now in those other conferences wants to be ASU next year.
Yeah. And on that note, you talk about ASU and what they did. I know it's hard to repeat and pull off what they did.
Hard.
The loss of Cam Scattaboo scares me for them because he personifies their brand and their attitude and their culture. And Kenny Dillingham's got to find another identity, another guy that can bring that to the field.
Yep.
But what can ASU do next year? I mean, what do you feel about them?
I think it's fascinating because there's going to be totally different dynamics. They're probably going to get picked first or second in the Big 12. So the expectations externally, internally are going to be, bigger by an order of magnitude. You wonder what the locker room's going to be like because guys are going to be thinking about the NFL that weren't this year. The NIL payments, all that stuff. Everything changes when you have success. We saw it with Arizona. Arizona won 10 games in 2023. Brought back a lot of their core players. They had a coaching change, granted. It's all different. And it's harder. I think it's harder to stay on top than it is to get on top, especially in the Big 12, where there's no blue blood, but you got a lot of good programs that are just this close from getting to the top. And if they get a break or two, they're going to be the next ASU. So I think ASU will be good next season, but I don't expect ASU to repeat. I think there's too many too many things went right that we didn't expect, and too many things could go wrong that you don't expect. It is hard to stay on top.
To me, that depends what's the rest of that conference doing too.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, the Pac-12 schools came in and, maybe the narrative on the Pac-12, the old world Pac-12 is, hey, that was a pretty good conference. Look at what Oregon did in the Big Ten. Look at what ASU did in the Big 12. That conference, there was nothing wrong with the football. But I'm interested in whether Kenny Dillingham, he's got the quarterback. He'll get continuity there. That's such an important piece.
Sure.
But can he continue? Can his, will he capitalize on the enthusiasm of that fan base with NIL money? And will that manifest itself in revenue sharing in a way that he can go out and he can start getting into some new conversations that he never was able to get into before? So, NIL and revenue sharing are going to trump good weather and geography. And maybe, I want to play for this coach or that coach. You're going to still have to go buy players. They may be able to buy some players that others can't buy in that conference. And I expect Colorado to take a step back. And I don't know quite what the Oklahoma State, Kansas, K-State, what are they doing? I'm trying to figure out why there was so much kind of up and down and inconsistency with some of those schools.
We all thought that going into the Big 10, Big 12, Arizona and Utah were going to be at the top of the heap, and Colorado and ASU were going to be at the bottom, and it flipped. And it could flip again.
Yeah.
It could flip again. But you're right. Dillingham's been talking about activating the Valley since he got the job. And that's what they've got to do in this next era if they're going to stay where they are.
You brought up something early that I want to talk a little bit more about. the whole Big Ten SEC love affair or alliance that they have created. And what do you make of this? They're talking about wanting to meet again privately. They are saying they believe they have unilateral authority to make changes to the CFP format.
Yep.
2026 and beyond. What do you make of all that?
Well, yeah, Yahoo had a report, I think it was yesterday, that there's going to be another summit, for lack of a better word, between the two conferences in the middle of February. They got together in Nashville in October. And, this is going to be an ongoing process, but they are certainly thinking about what the playoff is going to look like with the 2026 season. That's the start of the new contract cycle with ESPN. So there is no format. They could keep everything the same. They could add teams. It could become 14. They could create automatic bids for for every conference. So there's no at-larges, right? That's, the prospect of the SEC and Big Ten each getting 4 bids before the season even starts is certainly on the table. We'll see. But if you're everybody else, you should be a little concerned.
Yeah. And I keep thinking, I think everybody else, Big 12, ACC, Mountain West, New World Pac-12.
New World, yeah.
The American. I think this is the time where they've got to get together and hold their own summit and decide, how much leverage are they going to cede to these two big conferences? Because I feel like they should have put their foot down when revenue sharing for this CFP, this next contract first came up, and the SEC and the Big Ten took 29% each,
right?
And then said, "Hey, we'll give you 17 in the ACC, we'll give you 15 in the Big 12, and then we'll scale down from there." Look, the SEC and the Big Ten need these other schools.
They do.
But for how long, I don't know. But they need them, a little less every year, Wilner. And so I think if you're the other schools and you're watching the Big Ten and the SEC get together, you're these other conferences, I think you better hold your own summit. You better start talking about whether or not you should be negotiating for things as a group, because otherwise, they're going to run off with it. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to run off with the whole tournament. And I still think there's enough geography with these other conferences to really have some power. And you got some leverage, because the Big Ten and the SEC don't really capture the entire country. It's very centralized to the southern part of the country. And the Big Ten's got the Midwest and then, some markets in the West, but they don't capture the Pacific time zone. They don't capture the Mountain time zone. They don't really capture people in the Northeast. And so I think, these other conferences right now have some leverage, and I think they need to use it. And I don't think that the Big Ten and the SEC really want to stand in front of Congress and say, we ran off with it, right? And have to face a lot of questions.
Well, that's the big thing, is the threat of legal action, right? A lawsuit could come from anywhere, and they've got to be careful about that. They also need to be careful about internal politics, state politics, right? There's some places where, the state of Kentucky, right? Could Kentucky go off and Louisville gets left behind, right? So same thing in South Carolina, where you got South Carolina and Clemson, Texas, where you've got the schools on the different tiers of conferences. So I think politically and legally, it is probably more complicated than, the SEC and Big Ten want it to seem when they're in the boardroom trying to leverage their way to a kind of a new era. The Yahoo's report was 4 bids for the Big Ten, 4 for the SEC automatically, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, 1 for the Group of 5, and 1 for an at-large, which would be Notre Dame. So 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 for if you're scoring at home. I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
Fans won't, but we'll see if they can bluff their way into getting that worked out.
I'll go back to the revenue sharing. I just feel like, all of the FBS schools should have got one share of the CFP revenue, right? And then you reward the conferences that do the best on the field, and you give them additional payouts. And instead, you've got 58% of the revenue from the event going to the SEC and the Big Ten. How do the others compete? How do they keep those two conferences within view of the front windshield? They should have put their foot down. I don't think the SEC and the Big Ten, they were posturing like, hey, we're just run off and do our own thing. Go right ahead and see how that works. But I think it's the time now for the Mountain West, the Pac-12, the American, the Big 12, the ACC to sit down and go, hey, are we comfortable with what these other two conferences are doing? And by the way, it's not what's best for the sport. Chip Kelly was asked in Atlanta if he wanted to be commissioner, and he said no. He nominated David Shaw and Chris Peterson and some others, but he said, I feel like if we just had a commissioner, that solves half the problem.
It
and
does.
You don't have anybody looking out for the greater good. And the NCAA is not that entity.
The thing is, as soon as you appoint a commissioner, then the SEC and Big Ten lose their power, right? Yeah. Because now there's somebody over them. So they'll never do it, I don't think. And if they, it can't be a coach. I know Saban, Chris Peterson, David Shaw. It can't be a coach. It's got to be somebody who can maneuver politically and looks at things from a business standpoint, from a governance standpoint, and not a head coach. As much respect as some of those guys have, it wouldn't work.
And I think your board of governors become your commissioners, but your overall commissioner of the game is, somebody who's looking out for, who's the Pete Rozelle of college football, who's the Rob Manfred, who's, it's got to be somebody who cares about the game and sees the broader picture. And we don't have that right now. And I think, it's great. Like if I'm the Big Ten and the SEC, of course, I'm going to go huddle and go, hey, what's best for us? Let's do this. But this is the time, and I felt like this should have happened a year ago with these other conferences. They have to hold their own summit. They get together and talk about how they defend their turf, because otherwise there's no turf to defend.
You're right. Speaking of Rob Manfred,
you
recently, I assume, submitted a Baseball Hall of Fame ballot, huh?
I did, and I voted for Ichiro.
Okay, you weren't the guy.
Yeah. That was such an easy pick. Like, look, a lot of times when I get that ballot in front of me, I will go back and look like, okay, CC Sabathia, 251 wins, his career. You start to debate guys and compare to guys in the Hall of Fame. Ichiro, like, stand up, sit down. You check his name. He's one of those guys like Nolan Ryan and Ken Griffey Jr. and Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter. He's one of those guys that you just go, he's in.
Yeah.
And I get it. There are some holdover old school Baseball Writers Association of America voters who will say, I don't vote for first ballot guys as a matter of principle, because Babe Ruth was not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like he didn't get 100%, right? Yep. Nobody's going to be 100%, but that's why people think baseball writers are snobby. Like you gotta acknowledge that, like, just there's some guys that belong in the Hall of Fame. It's not the Hall of Very Good. So, yes, be discerning, but Ichiro is a no-brainer for his Gold Gloves and his All-Star appearance. He started 9 All-Star games. He's a starter in 9 All-Star games. He's got the benchmarks, 3,000 hits.
Right.
Terrific defensive player. Could run, could hit with power if he wanted to. He hit for average. Rookie of the Year, MVP. Come on.
Do you think we'll ever know who didn't vote for one person?
Yeah, on February 4th, they will release publicly.
Oh,
like when you get your ballot, you have, there's a chance here we might not know, but we'll figure it out. When you get your ballot, you can check, do I want my vote to be public or not?
Okay.
Yes, no. February 4th, the ballots go public. So I am kind of thinking it might be the same guy who didn't check the box for Derek Jeter. That's just a hunch.
But whoever that was, he voted for Mariano Rivera.
Maybe he didn't like Jeter and he liked Rivera. Or maybe he didn't vote. Like, it becomes the story, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. The story should be the guys that were voted in.
Right. Yep. Good way to put it.
But I look back, Nolan Ryan, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he didn't get 6 votes. 6 people didn't vote for Nolan Ryan. He won 300 plus games, threw all those no-hitters, Cy Youngs, and they went, nah, not deserving of the Hall of Fame.
Man, that's crazy.
Well, hey, anybody watching, you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, make a commitment to us. Love your comments as well. Always go back and read those after the episode. It's fantastic. It's not a cesspool in there. So thank you for the good comments and the good questions. Make sure that you're reading me at johncanzano.com and read Jon Wilner at wilnerhotline.com. And we're back next week with an all new episode.
Thanks very much, everybody.